The first thing my son did after the judge pronounced my husband dead was ask me where the safe was. That was the moment I understood this was no longer grief. This was something colder. My name is Margaret Holloway. I was 62 years old when my family decided I was no longer useful, and I was old enough to recognize the sound of betrayal even when it arrived wrapped in sympathy and casseroles. The question still echoes in my ears. We were standing in the hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly, the smell of disinfectant clinging to my coat. Daniel did not look at me when he asked it. He stared at the wall like he was discussing plumbing repairs, not the aftermath of a marriage that had lasted 4 decades. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice. "Dad always kept cash. You know where he put it, right?" I remember blinking slow, as if my body needed extra time to register the cruelty. I had not even signed the death paperwork yet. My hands still smelled like my husband's skin, like antiseptic and soap. "There is no safe," I said. Daniel sighed, already irritated, already disappointed. That was the first fracture, the first small crack in what I believed was family. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with people and noise and opinions. My daughter-in-law Linda organized everything without asking. She rearranged my kitchen, replaced my old coffee mugs with a matching white set, and told me it was time to simplify. She said that word a lot. Simplify, as if my life were clutter. My daughter Claire came home for the funeral, wearing black heels she could barely walk in. She cried loudly during the service, gripping my arm like a prop. But afterward, when I asked her to stay a few more days, she said she couldn't. Work was too busy. Her flight left early. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the place where my husband used to sit. I had cooked too much out of habit. The food went cold. I ate standing up because sitting felt like an admission of permanence. 3 weeks later, Daniel called a family meeting. He said it was about my well-being. That phrase should have warned me. We sat in my living room. My living room. The one I had dusted and vacuumed for years. The one where I had nursed sick children and wrapped Christmas presents and sat awake waiting for my husband to come home from late shifts. Daniel sat across from me, legs crossed, tablet balanced on his knee. Linda beside him, hand on his arm. Claire joined by video call, her face floating on the screen like a ghost. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we're worried." I said nothing. "You've been through a lot," he continued, "and we think it might be time to consider options." Options. Another word that sounded gentle but tasted sharp. Linda leaned forward. "There are wonderful communities now. Safe, structured. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or upkeep." I felt the floor tilt. "Are you saying you want me to leave my home?" Daniel frowned. "No one's saying that. Not exactly. But the house is big and expensive, and frankly what I asked." He hesitated, then said it. "It's inefficient." I stared at him. At the man I carried inside me for 9 months, the boy whose scraped knees I cleaned, the teenager I defended when teachers said he lacked discipline. "I'm inefficient," I asked quietly. "No, Mom, the situation is—" Claire's voice crackled through the speaker. "We just think Dad would want what's best." That did it. They always invoked my husband when they wanted leverage. He was their shield, their permission slip. I stood up, slowly. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, but my voice came out steady. "Your father wanted me to be respected." Daniel sighed again, the same sigh from the hospital hallway. "Mom, let's not make this emotional." That was the second fracture, wider this time. A week later, I found documents in Daniel's handwriting on my desk. Financial summaries, property valuations. My house reduced to numbers. There was a sticky note on top. "We'll discuss this soon." That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. Every creak felt like a question. Every shadow felt unfamiliar. I realized something then, something that made my chest ache. They were not asking for my consent. They were waiting for my compliance. And the worst part was this. Deep down, I knew exactly how this would end if I stayed quiet. I had watched it happen to other women. Women my age, widows, mothers who had given everything and were left with polite smiles and locked doors. I rolled onto my side and stared at the dark ceiling. I had not survived 62 years to be edited out of my own life. And if they thought I would step aside without a fight, they had gravely misunderstood who they were dealing with. Because I was done simplifying. The first lie they told about me was that I was forgetful. It started small, the way all effective lies do. Daniel would correct me when I remembered something accurately. Linda would exchange looks with him, the kind meant to be noticed. Concerned, subtle, practiced. Mom, you already told us that, Daniel said one afternoon when I mentioned a doctor's appointment. I hadn't. A week later, Claire called and asked if I was eating properly. Her tone was syrupy, slow, as if speaking to a child. I told her exactly what I'd cooked the night before. She laughed softly. You don't have to pretend with us, she said. That was when I realized the narrative had shifted. I was no longer grieving, I was declining. The paperwork followed quickly after that. Linda brought over a folder one Tuesday morning. She placed it on the kitchen counter like a gift. Inside were brochures for assisted living facilities printed in soft colors, smiling gray-haired couples holding hands by fountains. There's a waiting list, she said. We don't want to rush you. I flipped through the pages slowly. And my house? Daniel answered without looking up from his phone. We'll handle it. I closed the folder. My fingers were steady. Handle it how? He glanced at Linda. She nodded. We'd put it in a family trust. For your protection. There it was. The third fracture. A clean, sharp line straight through my chest. For my protection, I repeated. Yes, Daniel said, so no one can take advantage of you. I almost laughed. Almost. That night, I went through my files. Decades of paperwork, mortgage statements, tax returns. The original deed with my name printed clearly, undeniably, in ink that had not faded. I had signed for that house just as much as my husband had. I had worked 2 jobs when he was laid off. I had kept us afloat, and now my own children were positioning themselves as my guardians. I found an email on Daniel's old laptop a few days later. He had left it at the house careless. The password was still his childhood nickname. I hadn't raised a criminal, but I had raised a man who underestimated his mother. The email was from a lawyer. Subject line: preliminary capacity evaluation. I read it twice, then a third time slower. They were planning to declare me incompetent. I sat back in the chair, my palms pressed flat against the desk. The room felt too quiet, too still. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast. This was no longer about money. This was erasure. They wanted to remove me legally, surgically, with forms and signatures and well-meaning language. They wanted my house, yes, but more than that, they wanted control. Control of the story. Control of the ending. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent to keep the peace. All the apologies I had made first. All the sacrifices I had framed as love. Silence, I realized, had taught them exactly how far they could go. I picked up the phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Eleanor Price. She was my college roommate, a retired corporate attorney. Sharp, discreet, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. She answered on the second ring. Margaret, she said, I was wondering when you'd call. That was when I let myself cry, just once, quietly. We met 2 days later at a diner off the interstate. Neutral ground. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. When I finished, she looked at me and said, They've already made their first mistake. What's that? I asked. They assumed you wouldn't fight back. She slid a napkin across the table and began sketching a timeline. Actions, counteractions. This won't be loud at first, she said. Revenge at our age never is. It's patient. I stared at the napkin, at the lines forming something that looked like a map. For the first time since my husband died, I felt something other than loss. I felt clarity, and underneath it something steady and dangerous. Resolve. Because if my children wanted to turn me into a liability, I would show them exactly how costly that decision would be. And I would do it without raising my voice. Not yet. The next move I made was invisible. That was the point. People think revenge begins with confrontation, raised voices, slammed doors. It doesn't. Not for women like me. It begins with observation. With learning how the room breathes when you stop filling it with your own apologies. I stopped correcting them. When Daniel told Claire on the phone that I'd forgotten to pay the electricity bill, I nodded. When Linda asked if I remembered where I put my checkbook, I smiled and said maybe I'd misplaced it. I let the story grow legs. Meanwhile, Eleanor and I worked quietly. She arranged for a full cognitive evaluation, not through Daniel's recommended doctor, but through an independent specialist 3 towns over. I drove myself. I answered every question with precision. Dates, names, calculations, patterns. When it was over, the doctor leaned back and said, almost amused, You're sharper than most of my colleagues. The report was sealed and notarized. Insurance policies came next. I updated beneficiaries. Retirement accounts were reorganized, not hidden, reframed, everything documented, everything clean. Then we turned to the house. Eleanor had me order a formal appraisal. Not the casual estimate Daniel had shown me on his tablet, but a full valuation. The number startled even me. Decades of market growth. A quiet neighborhood that had become desirable without my noticing. My home wasn't inefficient. It was a prize. That explained the urgency. The sudden concern, the manufactured worry about my memory. Once you see motive clearly, behavior stops being confusing. Daniel began calling more often. He'd ask how I was feeling, whether I'd eaten, whether I remembered to take my vitamins. He spoke slowly now, carefully. I matched his pace. One afternoon, Linda came by unannounced. She brought soup. She brought flowers. She brought a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We just want to help," she said, setting things down in the kitchen she'd already rearranged twice. I watched her. Her hands moved confidently through my space as if she were rehearsing ownership. "I've been tired lately," I said softly. She brightened immediately. "That's understandable." "I forget things sometimes," I added. Her lips pressed together, pleased. "That happens. I worry I'm becoming a burden." She reached for my hand. "You're not a burden." But she didn't sound convincing. She sounded relieved. That night, Eleanor emailed me a copy of something she'd uncovered. A draft trust document. It named Daniel as executor, Claire as secondary, Linda as co-manager, me listed as grantor, but with conditional authority. In plain language, it meant this. Once I signed, they could override my decisions. I didn't sleep much after that. Not from fear, from calculation. Thanksgiving was approaching. Daniel had already announced that we'd all gather at the house. My house. He said it like a favor, like permission. I told him I was looking forward to it. 2 days before the holiday, Claire arrived early. She hugged me stiffly. Her eyes scanned the living room, the shelves, the furniture. "You've kept everything the same," she said. "For now," I replied. That night I overheard her on the phone in the guest room. My door was open, her voice carried. "She's weaker," Claire whispered. "I think it's working." Something in me went very still. Thanksgiving morning, I set the table myself. I used the good china, the linen napkins, the ones Daniel's children had spilled cranberry sauce on years ago without apologizing. Linda arrived with a folder tucked under her arm. Daniel followed, confident, smiling. After dinner, he cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we should talk." I nodded. "I agree." Linda placed the folder on the table. "These are just preliminary." I picked it up. I didn't open it. "I have something for you too," I said. Daniel blinked. "What's that?" "A conversation," I replied. "But first, I'd like you to tell me something." They waited. "When did you decide I was no longer competent?" The silence was immediate, thick. Daniel laughed awkwardly. Because I continued, "It must have been before you contacted a lawyer, or before you told Claire I was forgetting bills, or before you planned to put my house into a trust I didn't request." Linda's face drained of color. I stood up. "I'm tired," I said calmly. "We'll finish this later." Daniel looked confused, frustrated. That night, Eleanor texted me one sentence. "They've taken the bait." And I knew the next phase had begun. The first official strike came disguised as kindness. Daniel emailed me the Monday after Thanksgiving. Subject line: next steps. He suggested gently that we schedule a capacity assessment with his attorney's preferred physician. He emphasized that it was routine, protective, temporary. I forwarded the email to Eleanor without comment. She replied with a single word: "Good." I agreed to the assessment. That was the part they didn't expect. The doctor's office was polished, cold, diplomas on the wall like trophies. Daniel sat beside me in the waiting room, his knee bouncing slightly. He smiled at me every few minutes, reassuring, patronizing. When the nurse called my name, Daniel stood. "Just her," the nurse said. He frowned. "I should be present." She shook her head. "Policy." Inside the office, the doctor spoke to me as if I were fragile glass. He asked the same questions Eleanor's doctor had asked weeks earlier. Dates, names, memory tests. I answered carefully. Not too fast, not too slow. At the end, he said, "You show mild cognitive decline." I tilted my head. "Based on what age-related indicators?" he replied. I smiled. "Did you review my independent evaluation?" He hesitated. "No." "I brought a copy," I said, sliding it across the desk, along with my attorney's contact information. The color shifted in his face. 2 days later, Daniel showed up angry. "They rejected the assessment," he snapped. "Your lawyer interfered." I poured tea, slowly. "She didn't interfere," I said. She corrected. Linda crossed her arms. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." No, I replied. You did that when you assumed I wouldn't notice. Daniel slammed his hand on the counter. We're trying to protect you. From what I asked, my own autonomy. That night, Eleanor and I met again. She brought more documents, evidence, emails, the trust drafts, the assessment report, the appraisal. You're ready, she said. For what? For escalation. The next week, Daniel's tone changed. He stopped calling. Claire stopped texting. Linda sent a single message asking if I'd reconsidered. I said nothing. Instead, I took action. With Eleanor present, I executed a new will. Clean, explicit. It excluded Daniel and Claire entirely. It placed the house and a substantial portion of my assets into a charitable foundation supporting older women facing financial abuse. Everything was legal, irrevocable. We recorded the signing, 2 witnesses, time-stamped. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She sent Daniel a copy. Not the full document, just the cover page. That night my phone rang. Daniel's voice was tight. What is this? A consequence, I said. You can't do this, he snapped. That house belongs in the family. It does, I replied. Just not the way you thought. Linda took the phone. You're being vindictive. I laughed softly. No, I'm being accurate. There was shouting, accusations, guilt, all the old tools. I let them exhaust themselves. Then I said one sentence. If you contest this, everything comes out. The emails, the evaluations, the trust drafts, the narrative you built. Silence. Daniel finally spoke. What do you want? I closed my eyes. I want you to stop, I said. And I want you to understand that I see you clearly now. They didn't respond. 2 weeks later, I received notice that Daniel's attorney had withdrawn representation. The house felt different after that, quieter, lighter. But I knew this wasn't over. People like my children don't accept loss easily. They regroup. And when they did, I would be ready. Because this time I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating. And the final movement was still to come. The silence that followed felt unnatural. For the first time in my life, no one from my family checked on me during the holidays. No calls on Christmas Eve. No obligatory card. Not even a passive-aggressive text. The absence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. They were regrouping. People like Daniel do not retreat because they understand. They retreat because they are recalculating. I spent Christmas morning alone at the kitchen table, sunlight slipping through the thin curtains, dust dancing in the air like it always had. I made coffee the way my husband liked it even though he was gone. Some habits stay because they anchor you. Others stay because letting go hurts more than holding on. I was halfway through a piece of toast when the knock came. Firm, official. 2 men stood on my porch, dark coats, clipboards, polite smiles sharpened by purpose. Margaret Holloway, one asked. Yes. We're with Adult Protective Services. We received a report expressing concern for your safety and mental capacity. There it was, the next escalation. I nodded calmly and stepped aside. Come in. They looked surprised. Most people resist, panic, argue. I offered them tea. They asked questions about my daily routine, my finances, my support system. I answered honestly, not defensively. I showed them my calendar, my checkbook, my medication list. I handed them Eleanor's business card without explanation. One of the men asked gently, Do you feel pressured by your family to make financial decisions? Yes, I said. That single word shifted the room. By the time they left, their tone had changed. Professional concern now pointed in a different direction. That evening, Eleanor called. APS contacted me. Daniel overplayed his hand. I closed my eyes and exhaled. What happens now? Now she said there's a record, and not the one he wanted. The next move came from Claire. She showed up unannounced 3 days later, standing in my doorway with red eyes and trembling hands. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, strategic. I'm worried about you, she said. I stepped aside again. She cried in my living room, told me she felt torn, that Daniel was under stress, that Linda was pushing him, that none of this was supposed to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. I watched her carefully, the pauses, the timing, the way she avoided specifics. Did you know about the evaluation, I asked. She hesitated, just long enough. Yes, she admitted, but I thought it was temporary. Did you know about the trust, I asked? Another pause, longer. Yes. The truth landed between us like a dropped plate. I need you to understand, she said quickly. This wasn't personal, it was practical. I nodded slowly. So was my response. She reached for my hand. I let her. It felt strange, like holding something hollow. When she left, I knew something important had shifted. The mask had slipped too far. They could no longer pretend this was about care. That night, Eleanor sent me a message. Daniel's company is being audited. I stared at the screen. Apparently, when Daniel's attorney withdrew certain documents, raised questions. Financial overlap, conflicts of interest, a pattern of control that extended beyond family. Karma doesn't rush, it waits. Daniel called me the morning after New Year's. He sounded different, tired, edges frayed. We need to talk, he said. I agree, I replied. He asked to meet at his office. I chose a public cafe instead. He arrived late. His suit wrinkled, his confidence dulled. For the first time, he looked like a man whose plans had begun unraveling. I'm under pressure, he said, skipping pleasantries. Someone reported me. I wonder who, I said calmly. He flinched. You didn't have to do this. I didn't, I replied. You did. He leaned forward. If you reverse the will, I can make this go away. There it was, the offer, the confirmation. I won't, I said. His jaw tightened. You're destroying this family. I met his eyes. No, I'm revealing it. He stood abruptly. People stared. He didn't care. You think you've won, he said, but you're alone. I waited until he sat back down. I was alone long before this, I said softly. I just didn't admit it. He left without another word. 2 weeks later, Eleanor called with the update. Daniel had been placed on administrative leave. The audit expanded. His name was no longer an asset. It was a liability. Claire stopped calling. Linda sent a message accusing me of cruelty, of spite, of betrayal. I deleted it. Instead, I focused on what came next. The foundation paperwork was finalized. Quietly. The first meeting scheduled. Women like me, widows, mothers, professionals pushed aside once their usefulness expired. I stood in the empty house one evening listening to the hum of the heater, the creak of familiar floors. This place had held my silence for decades. Now it would hold something else. Truth. And as I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They thought this story was about inheritance, but it was never about what I left behind. It was about what I reclaimed, and the final reckoning was still ahead. Power doesn't disappear when challenged. It mutates. Daniel's fall did not bring peace the way I expected. It brought attention, the wrong kind. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted lunch. Distant relatives asked careful questions masked as concern. Someone leaked a version of the story, and it wasn't flattering to me. According to that version, I was unstable, vindictive, a grieving widow who had lashed out and destroyed her own family. I recognized the strategy immediately. If they couldn't control my assets, they would control the narrative. The first article appeared online on a local business blog. No names, but enough detail to identify us. A senior executive under investigation. A mother who had misinterpreted her children's intentions. The word revenge appeared twice. Daniel hadn't written it, but he hadn't stopped it either. Eleanor warned me, they're testing public pressure. If they can shame you into doubt, you'll soften. I didn't soften. Instead, I prepared. The Foundation's first public meeting was scheduled for early March. I insisted it remain open to the community. No secrecy, no exclusivity. Transparency was my shield. The night before the meeting, I barely slept, not from fear, from anticipation. When I arrived at the community center the next morning, the parking lot was already half full. Women stood in small clusters, coats buttoned, purses clutched close. Some were my age, some older, some younger with tired eyes and careful posture. They looked like women who had been told to be grateful for too little. I took my place at the front of the room. The microphone felt heavier than it should have. My name is Margaret Holloway, I began. And I was almost declared incompetent by my own family. A murmur rippled through the room. I didn't dramatize. I didn't embellish. I told the truth, plain, precise, names omitted, facts intact. I spoke about financial coercion, about quiet manipulation, about how often older women are dismissed the moment they stop being convenient. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one woman stood up. She said her son had taken over her accounts without asking. Another spoke about being pressured into selling her home. Another cried and said she thought she was alone. I realized then that this wasn't my revenge. It was theirs too. After the meeting, a reporter approached me, real press this time. She asked if I was willing to go on record. Yes, I said. That interview changed everything. Daniel called me the night the interview aired. His voice was sharp with panic. You made this public. Yes, I said. You're humiliating us. No, I replied, I'm telling the truth. You're painting us as monsters. You did that yourselves. He paused. I could hear his breathing. You could still fix this, he said. Say you misunderstood. Say you were emotional. I laughed, not bitter, just clear. I spent most of my life being emotional for other people, I said. I'm done now. The next weeks were relentless. More articles, radio segments, invitations to speak. The foundation received donations. Letters poured in, handwritten, careful, thanking me for saying what they couldn't. And with every public word, Daniel's position weakened. The audit concluded. Findings were released. Nothing criminal, but enough ethical breaches to end his career where it stood. His resignation was announced quietly buried beneath other headlines. Claire sent me a letter. Not an apology, an explanation. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about not knowing how to stand up to her brother. She said she missed me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some bridges don't collapse in flames, they erode. Linda never contacted me again. One afternoon, I walked through the house, slowly touching the walls, the banister, the door frames. This place had held pain. Now it held purpose. The foundation moved its offices into the first floor. Nothing was renovated beyond what was necessary. I wanted the house to remain honest. On the day the sign was installed outside, I stood on the porch and watched the letters catch the light. Holloway Center for Women's Autonomy. My name, not as possession, as legacy. Eleanor stood beside me. Do you regret anything, she asked? I thought of my children, of the years I'd spent cushioning their choices, of the silence I'd mistaken for peace. No, I said, I regret waiting so long. That night, alone in my bedroom, I opened my journal and wrote something I hadn't allowed myself to write before. They didn't lose me because I fought back. They lost me because they forgot I was human. And for the first time since my husband died, I slept without the weight of unfinished truth pressing on my chest. But the story wasn't over. Because the final reckoning doesn't happen in courtrooms or headlines. It happens when the people who tried to erase you are forced to live in a world where you no longer center them. And that moment was coming. I didn't expect remorse, but I didn't expect desperation either. It arrived in early spring disguised as nostalgia. Daniel showed up at the house one afternoon without calling. I saw his car through the front window before I heard the knock. For a moment, my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My hand paused mid-motion on the kettle. Old instincts. I let them pass. When I opened the door, he looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. His suit was gone, replaced by a jacket that had seen better days. He smiled, uncertain. Hi, Mom. I stepped aside. You have 10 minutes. He nodded, relieved just to be inside. We sat at opposite ends of the living room. The space between us felt intentional now, like a boundary drawn in air. I didn't come to fight, he said quickly. I just wanted to talk. I'm listening, I replied. He rubbed his hands together. Things didn't turn out the way I expected. No, I said. They rarely do when control is mistaken for care. He flinched. You don't know what it was like. The pressure, the expectations. I do, I said calmly. I lived under them for decades. He looked at the floor. I lost my job. I already knew. Still hearing it spoken felt different, final. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Not because he deserved absolution, but because loss changes a person whether they learn from it or not. He looked up sharply. You are... Yes, I said, but that doesn't change anything. Silence settled between us. I need help, he said finally. There it was, the real reason. What kind of help, I asked. Financial, he admitted, just temporary. I folded my hands in my lap. Do you remember what you said to me after your father died? He swallowed. I was grieving. So was I replied. And you asked about the safe. His eyes closed briefly. I won't help you financially, I said, but I will offer you something else. He looked up, hope flickering. I'll offer you accountability, I continued. If you want to rebuild your life, you can do it honestly, without shortcuts, without manipulation. If you ever want a relationship with me again, it starts there. His face tightened. That's it. That's everything I said. He stood slowly. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. I had to. At the door, he hesitated. Do you still love us? I didn't answer immediately. I love who I thought you were, I said finally. And I'm open to loving who you become. Those are not the same thing. He left without another word. I closed the door gently. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, watching the sun slide down the walls. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty. Revenge isn't always about watching someone fall. Sometimes it's about refusing to catch them. Claire came next. Unlike Daniel, she didn't announce herself. She sent an email, short, careful, asking if she could visit. I waited 3 days before responding. Yes, I wrote Sunday afternoon. She arrived with a pie. Store-bought, cherry. She used to love baking. I wondered when that stopped. She looked around the house, slowly taking in the changes. The sign outside, the new office furniture in the front room, the quiet sense of purpose that now lived in the walls. It feels different, she said. It is, I replied. We sat at the table where I had once eaten alone after the funeral. She placed the pie between us like an offering. I didn't handle things well, she began. I know that. I waited. I was afraid, she continued. Of Daniel, of conflict, of being cut off. And of me, I added gently. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. Yes. That admission mattered more than an apology. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I didn't think you'd actually leave us. I met her gaze. You left me first. She cried then, quietly, no theatrics, just grief. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just don't want to lose you completely. I took a breath. This was the moment I'd imagined and dreaded in equal measure. Forgiveness isn't the starting point, I said. Truth is. She nodded. I need you to understand something, I continued. I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to survive. I know, she whispered. And survival changes people, I said. If you want to be part of my life, it won't look like before. What will it look like, she asked. Equal, I replied. Honest, with boundaries. She reached for my hand. This time I didn't pull away. I can try, she said. That's all anyone can do, I replied. When she left, I wrapped the pie and put it in the freezer. Not rejection, preservation. Some things are better saved for later. That night, I walked through the house again. The Holloway Center hummed quietly downstairs. Voices from earlier meetings echoed faintly in my memory. I stood in my bedroom and looked at my reflection. I was older, that hadn't changed, but I was no longer shrinking to fit spaces designed to outgrow me. The reckoning I'd imagined wasn't loud. It was quiet conversations, closed doors, lines finally drawn. And as I turned out the light, I understood something with absolute clarity. The most painful consequence my children faced wasn't losing the house. It was losing the version of me who would have given it to them without question. And that loss was permanent. People assume the end of a revenge story arrives with applause. A verdict, a downfall, a moment where the wronged person finally feels full. That isn't how it happened for me. The real ending began quietly on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I watched a woman I had never met unlock the front door of my house with shaking hands. Her name was Ruth. She was 71. A retired bookkeeper whose son had convinced her to co-sign a loan that swallowed her savings and then disappeared when the debt came due. She stood in my entryway, clutching a single suitcase like it was proof she still existed. You can take your time, I told her. This place isn't going anywhere. She cried then, not loudly, the way people cry when they've been holding their breath for too long. By spring, there were 4 women using the space regularly. Meetings on Tuesday afternoons, tea on Thursdays, quiet conversations that carried more truth than any courtroom testimony I had ever given. The house changed again, not in ownership, in energy. Laughter returned, not forced, not nostalgic, real. The kind that surprises you when it comes out of your mouth because you forgot you still knew how to make that sound. One evening, Eleanor sat with me on the back porch, the sun dropping low behind the trees. She looked tired but satisfied. You know, she said, what you did scared a lot of people. I figured, I replied. Especially men who rely on silence to maintain control. I smiled faintly. Good. Daniel didn't come back after that day. But I heard about him, through mutual acquaintances, through the careful gossip people use when they're not sure where you stand. He moved, downsized, took a consulting role that didn't carry his old authority. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't mourn it either. It wasn't my story anymore. Claire came once a month. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. She learned slowly that my boundaries weren't punishment. They were structure. One afternoon she asked me if I ever missed the old days. I thought about it carefully. I miss who I thought we were, I said. I don't miss pretending. That answer stayed with her. I could see it in her eyes. As for Linda, she faded from my world entirely, which was exactly where she belonged. The final legal step came in late summer. The foundation became fully independent. I stepped back from daily operations. Younger women stepped forward, capable, clear-eyed, unafraid to speak. On my last day as acting director, they gave me a small plaque. My name. No titles, no dates. Just one sentence. She refused to disappear. That night, alone in my bedroom, I opened the window and listened to the house breathe. The same sounds, the same creaks, but now they felt like companionship instead of accusation. I thought about my husband, about what he would have said if he had lived to see all this. I think he would have been quiet, thoughtful, proud in that understated way. I lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time, there was nothing left to prove. The last thing I reclaimed was not my house. It was my voice. It happened at the grocery store of all places. A woman recognized me from the interview. She approached cautiously, like she wasn't sure I was real. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Because of you, I said no to my daughter last week." Her voice trembled, mine didn't. "That's how it starts," I told her, with one no. She smiled like someone who had just learned a new language. That's the part no one tells you. Revenge doesn't end when the people who hurt you face consequences. It ends when you stop measuring your worth against their reactions. I no longer wake up wondering if I did the right thing. I wake up wondering what I'll bake for the women who gather around my table now. What story will be shared? What silence will finally be broken? Sometimes late at night, doubt tries to creep back in. It whispers old questions. What kind of mother walks away from her children? What kind of woman chooses herself this late in life? I answer it the same way every time. The kind who finally understands that love without respect is just control wearing a softer face. I did not destroy my family. I stopped allowing myself to be destroyed by it. If Daniel ever becomes a better man, that will be his work, not my sacrifice. If Claire learns to stand up without hiding behind fear, that will be her growth, not my burden. And if Linda tells herself a story where I am the villain, she is welcome to it. I am no longer auditioning for roles in other people's lives. This house still stands at the end of the street. Weathered, solid, unimpressed by opinion. Just like me. If you're listening to this and you feel that tightening in your chest, that quiet recognition, then this story wasn't just mine. It was yours too. And maybe today isn't the day you confront anyone. Maybe today is just the day you stop shrinking. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own unfinished truth, then take a moment to leave a comment, share your story, and let other women know they are not alone. And if you want more stories like this, stories where justice is slow, but certain, where women over 55 reclaim what was always theirs, then subscribe and stay. Some voices only grow stronger with time, and this one is just getting started.